Dr. Atchison here, and we're still talking about self and identity in chapter 12. This is the second lecture in that chapter, talking about self-esteem and academic self-concept. So self-esteem is this judgments we make about ourselves, about our own worth, and our feeling associated with those judgments. We all kind of know what self-esteem is. We talk about it. It's a very kind of popular term to talk about in kind of our culture. We know that by 4, children are starting to make several self-judgments, and these can kind of influence their self-esteem about their worth and their feelings associated with them. This self-esteem can really translate to initiative, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about academic self-concept at the end of this chapter. By 3, children can really give up easily if they have a history of parental criticism. If they're told you can't do that, you're not good at this, we'll see that this will kind of translate this self-esteem, these are abilities, belief in their abilities will translate to whether they're willing to try and how hard they're willing to try. So we see that these sorts of things are starting fairly early in development. As we develop and as we change, self-esteem continues to differentiate. We start to get new dimensions. We can have self-esteem in different areas. And in one situation, it may be very, very high, but in another situation, in another dimension, it may not. So we can have dimensions related to friendships, romantic appeal, job competence, academics, all kinds of different things can be related to our self-esteem. And we can have different levels of self-esteem in each of these. Generally, we see that self-esteem rises throughout development. We'd see a temporary drop at school transitions. So when children start into a new school, such as kindergarten, and then translate into when they transition to middle school, when they transition again to high school, we'll see a temporary drop, but it is just temporary. But as a whole, we see a kind of a gradual increase in terms of self-esteem. Individual differences really become more stable across development as well. So differences we see between someone's level of self-esteem, those will tend to be more stable as well. So we'll see if someone has generally high self-esteem, we'll see that their self-esteem will go up, as it does someone who has lower self-esteem. Their self-esteem may go up too, but that kind of difference between them usually stays fairly stable. Really, self-esteem is linked to the values of activities we have and the adjustment. Well-adjusted individuals typically have high self-esteem, where poor-adjusted individuals have low self-esteem. And this is talking about kind of psychological adjustment. And we can see that that someone who has well-adjusted is able to handle things very easily, is able to kind of navigate through tasks, that kind of will be reflective in their high self-esteem, just as someone who has trouble with these things will be reflective of low self-esteem. This is not just about the person. Self-esteem is definitely influenced by family and culture as well, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later. So younger children have high self-esteem, and again, like we said, this drops. So again, we see a gradual increase, but we see generally high self-esteem in young children as well. We see these drops at the school transition, such as into elementary school. And in adolescence, we do tend to see a drop again. As again, it's a general trend that it increases, but there are these dips. It's not a continuous kind of line. It will have some discontinuity to it, such as adolescence. And we'll see that some of this is due to the physical changes in puberty. Your body's awkward, so you feel awkward, which doesn't contribute well to self-esteem. We also see that, again, these changes in schools will really be indicative. You understood your last school. You knew the people. You knew how it worked. And so you felt pretty confident about that, and that contributed to your self-esteem. But you're now at a new school, and you don't know everybody, and you don't know how it works. And you're not adjusted to that situation. So again, we'll see those drops during these school changes. And girls tend to show more variability in terms of self-esteem. This is going to be a reflection of gender, not a reflection of sex. And this is going to be a reflection of a nurture kind of a thing in terms of kind of the gender roles and what we're teaching girls and women, rather than indicative of something different between the sexes. So it has more to do with the gender roles and the nurture factor of it than it has to do with any kind of genetic differences based on sex. So in early childhood, about 6 to 7, early to middle childhood, we'll see kind of general self-esteem really starts to differentiate into these different dimensions. It can include things like academic competence, which we'll talk about. It can also include things like social competence, how good you are with your friends, how good you are with peers. It can include other things that are related to activities that you're good at. So physical or athletic competence, different activities. This part of general self-esteem will be reflective of kind of what kind of experiences the child's doing, what kind of activities they're doing. Is the and are this physical athletic competence, is it outdoor games, is it sports? So we'll see all of these kind of contribute, and we see that physical appearance is a component about this too, that all of these things really work together to kind of get this general self-esteem. And this is really starting to differentiate into these different categories based on these different experiences by about 6 to 7. And this continues on through middle school and into high school. So again, culture influences self-esteem. We have differences in social comparisons. So kind of based on what the culture says is important, what the culture says is individuality important, is collectivism, is that community important, is it more important to make those social comparisons? We'll see those two kinds of things influence self-esteem. Gender types and gender stereotype expectations will be influential as well. We'll talk about that in the next chapter, where gender stereotypes are kind of those ideas of how we think we're supposed to behave. And sometimes we'll see that individuals who don't think that they're kind of, this also goes back to that sense of self, that kind of who they're supposed to be, based on what society says in terms of these stereotypes. If who they actually are, their real self doesn't match this kind of societal ideal self in terms of gender, this could be based on masculinity, being a man's man, or femininity, and it again is about this gender expression. So, an example, girls in appearance. We see girls tend to have lower self-esteem when they're focusing on appearance, because there's a higher stereotype of appearance for the female gender as opposed to the male gender. We see that girls tend to have higher language art self-esteem, and boys tend to have higher math and science and physical self-esteem. And these really match up with the kinds of gender things that we tell children that are important. That communication is really important for girls, and we really facilitate that for girls. And again, we'll talk about this more in the gender chapter. Whereas for boys, historically, there's been a push for boys to be engaged in math and science and different kinds of STEM activities. Also physical prowess. And so those are the areas that we'll see that boys tend to have higher self-esteem. And again, these are going to be mediated by the environment. In this case, mediated by the gender roles and the gender stereotypes the environment is placing on children. Academic self-concept is really being derived from academic performance. And again, this is a component of self-esteem for children. We'll see that it's influenced by both their motivation and their efforts, and they're really stemming this from kind of the attributions they're making, kind of the sources they're making. If someone has a mastery-oriented motivation, they're going to have a different outlook. They're going to have different kinds of motivation than if they have a helplessness attribution. So a mastery-oriented motivation is going to be more about kind of mastering that goal, just as the name sounds like, whereas a helplessness is going to be about kind of this internal doubt. And we'll see that people that have mastery-oriented approaches tend to have higher self-esteem, where those who have this learned helplessness tend to have lower self-esteem. And children's kind of implicit theories about intelligence can be impactful too. So Do you think that intelligence is something that's inherent and stable and not changeable, versus do you think that intelligence is something that is can be contributed to through effort and these sorts of things? So we talked a little bit about the different studies in academic performance between boys and girls, and they think that part of that has to do with this academic self-concept. Girls tend to see intelligence being more of a stable trait and academic abilities being more of a stable trait, where boys tend to see this being more malleable, something that they can change, that their effort can change. And we'll see that children then do better. Boys tend to have a higher academic self-concept than girls because of this, because they feel that they can create change. The boys do versus the girls. If they don't do well, it's an inherent trait, not something that they can change. There are also influences that can affect these attributions. So again, these mastery-oriented attributions, these kids have higher self-esteem and they credit their success to ability. So you get an A on a test. A mastery-oriented attribution is going to say, I got an A on that test because I worked hard. I studied hard and I did my work, and so I did well. Whereas if they get a low grade on an exam, that failure is due to something that they have control over. So they didn't do enough effort, or it's related to the difficulty of the task. It's something that's changeable, something that could be temporary. It doesn't have to do with this kind of inherent ability. That they see that these things are tangible, that they can manipulate them to do better. So again, kind of focusing on that goal and working to achieve that goal. And if that goal is not met, that's a function, that goal not being met is a function of possibly not providing enough effort, or possibly the task being too difficult. They're not going to say that that's because of something inherent in themselves, some of their own ability. Whereas individuals that have this learned helplessness really attribute their failures, not their successes, to ability. So they fail a test, it's not because they didn't work hard enough, it's because they're stupid. If they don't do well, it's because they can't do this. But their successes are going to be more seen as something chance. So this is going to be kind of also the difference of kind of pessimism versus optimism is going to be here involved in these kind of attributions. So we're going to see more optimism in these mastery-oriented attributions, where we're going to see more pessimism in this learned helplessness. People who exhibit learned helplessness attributions don't believe that effort affects achievement. They often will give up without really trying, because there's no point. I can't do it. This is who I am. I can't change that. This pessimistic outlook will really affect their choices that they're making in terms of academics, and give up without really trying it because it's too difficult, because I can't do it, because I don't have these abilities. And we see that parents can really influence these attributions. We can develop learned helplessness if the standards are too high. So if you set a goal for a child that they can't reach, the child may learn that they can't reach that goal, and they may think that that's because they don't have the skills to reach that goal, instead of that goal being too difficult. So setting the bar too high can be a way that we do this. Also, that harsh criticism that we talked about, saying the child is incapable of doing that, can also create these negative learned helplessness attributions. Trait statements, so saying, again, this is that difference of saying you are smart, you are stupid, you are this, you are that. Those trait statements sound like something that's not changeable. Instead of you worked hard and you did good, that's about activity, that's about mastery oriented. So how we talk about these things with children can really be influential in how they develop these attributions, whether there's something that they have control of, or if it's something that the environment controls, or something that's stable within themselves. Teachers also can do this. This is the difference between learning versus performance goals. So if you're given an assignment and you get a grade, and then the next time you're allowed to kind of correct those things for a higher grade, that's a learning goal. That individual is trying to get you to learn something new that you didn't learn before. Whereas a performance goal is just about getting that score and not setting a learning goal. So again, this is about that ability. Did you learn something? And so we'll see that that'll be more influential in getting this mastery-oriented approach. Gender influences, again, we talked about this a little bit. Gender influences, again, can be related to these trait statements. We see that girls are more susceptible to these trait statements than boys typically are. Socioeconomic status and ethnicity, these can play a role as well, as can the cultural values about achievement and about traits and skills. So in a mastery-oriented approach, they think that their reason for success is ability. Okay, so somebody that has a mastery-oriented approach sees that their ability is the reason that they did well. If they fail, those are controllable factors. There's something that can be changed by working hard, by getting more information, by better understanding the task, something that's controllable, something that they can approach. Whereas with learned helplessness individuals, they see that their success is an external factor. If they do well on the test, it's not because, oh, I'm smart, it's because the test was easy. It wasn't me, it was the test. Or I was lucky, I lucked out and did well on the test. Whereas the failure is due to the ability. So these are kind of complete opposites. So mastery-oriented is going to attribute ability to their successes, where learned helplessness is going to contribute ability to their failures. And they think that this can't be changed. These are those trait statements. I'm stupid. I can't do this. I'm not good at math. I'm not good at this. And so what's the point in trying because I'm not good at this? Working hard is not going to make a difference. And we'll see this indicative of these kind of learned helplessness behaviors in terms of academic achievements. Ways to really foster this mastery-oriented approach. Obviously, it sounds much better, right? It sounds like a healthier option. And so ways that we can foster this is the task makes a difference. So doing a task that's meaningful, doing a task that has a reason to do that task. A challenging task, but not one that's so high that the child can't reach that level. And really being responsive to a bunch of different interests. So one of the reasons that your paper, your source comparison paper, you got to pick your topic, was because you have different interests as related to developmental psychology. And that really allows you more opportunity for success. If you're interested in it, you're going to do a better job. And so allowing those diversity of your interests within developmental psychology is a way to kind of foster success. Parent-teacher communication, communicating with warmth and confidence in the child's abilities, value of achievement, and really the importance of effort. So, if my daughter doesn't do well on an assignment, the first question I ask her is, did you try hard? And if she didn't try hard, then we know the issue is that we need to try harder. If she did try hard, then we go and we look in other supports we can to help her understand that assignment better. So again, it's about kind of, and doing it in a really warmth, that doesn't mean anything about her, that doesn't have any long-term bearing on who she is or any kinds of traits. It's one assignment. And so, it doesn't change how I feel. And so communicating that to her is important from a parent's perspective. The same is important from teacher perspective. So on your source comparison papers, the thing that's at the top of your rubric is my favorite thing about your paper. To give those kind of positive feedbacks is important to really kind of have these approaches. Really modeling high behavior, high effort is important to overcome failure. So seeing parents do this, seeing teachers work hard is an important goal. It's not a do what I say, not what I do. It's a do what I do. And so modeling behavior can be very important as well. Performance evaluation. Making the evaluations of student work private so that it's not out where everybody can see, so that we don't have to share our successes and our failures. We have an opportunity for that to be private. And really emphasizing the individual progress and self-improvement. So you did better this time than you did the last time, and really focusing on that instead of how you did this time, that you improved, and that's the direction that we're headed, and that's the importance. The school environment can really play an impact as well. Small classes really allow the teacher to be more warmth and to give more opportunities to reward effort and achievement. And it offers more opportunities for cooperative learning and peer tutoring as well. To really accommodate individual and cultural differences in learning, to give different opportunities for learning. That's one of the reasons you have both a multiple choice test and a take-home test, is because each of you have different sets of skills, and so some of you may do really well in the multiple choice and not do well, struggle with essay questions, where some people may have the reverse. And so really honoring both of those types of test-taking abilities is important. And really creating an atmosphere that values academics and sends a message that everybody can do this. So this is also very much related to our chapter on education. The parental expectations really affect the child's perceptions of their own abilities. We'll talk about parenting style later on, and we see that the authoritative style is really associated with scaffolding, providing those tools for students, and really children have a higher academic self-concept. This concept is very predictive of academic behavior as well, and academic achievement. So if children think that they can, they do. And there's a great video that you should watch, you're required to watch, called I Can. It's a TED Talk about a lady in India who wants this I can mentality to be infectious. She talks about kind of empowering children and how this empowerment of children in terms of self-esteem really carries over into academic self-concept as well. So it's a great video that covers both self-esteem and academic self-concept and really rounds out this topic very nicely. So this ends our conversation about academic self-concept and self-esteem. Thanks.